If you still remember, Madiba, Mr. Makwetu, and myself, we had the privilege of addressing that body. I would be remiss not to acknowledge the stellar work being done by former President Mbeki. His tireless efforts in fostering African unity and peace, both through his leadership and the work of his foundation, are a source of inspiration to all of us. President Mbeki's unwavering belief in an integrated, peaceful contributions to resolving conflicts and promoting stability continue to shape our collective vision for the continent. After President Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev agreed in their 1985 summit to end the Cold War, there was hope that the conflict between West and East would be a thing of the past, and that the remaining countries still fighting for their freedom, namely Namibia and South Africa, would also gain independence. Indeed, this came to pass. Namibia attained its independence through the implementation of the UN Resolution 435. Dr. Chester Crocker, I still remember, former US Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs, and Mr. Mati Atisari, representing the UN in the executing the resolution, successfully succeeded in their efforts, and by 1990, Namibia was free. Similarly, then South African Defence Force was ordered to withdraw from the conflict in Angola and return directly to Pretoria. The Cuban forces were instructed to go home, and the ANC was sent to Uganda. As we know, South Africa became free in 1994 after a successful negotiation process. These peace initiatives by Russia and America helped to avoid a full-blown war, especially in South Africa, where such a conflict would have destroyed the country's infrastructure. South Africa's conflict resolution model became a blueprint for other countries facing similar situations, demonstrating the importance of negotiating around the table to find a common ground. Indeed, Nelson Mandela, the first democratic president of South Africa, initiated efforts to resolve conflicts in other parts of the continent, such as DRC, Burundi, and helping South Sudan by training their administrators, among other initiatives. During the era of the OAU, there was a more mature approach to conflict resolution, led by influential figures like late Brigadier Bita, who served as Executive Secretary of the Liberation Committee Prevention. It is against this background that we must recommend the establishment of a dedicated team within AU and regional bodies to be responsible for the early warning systems. Such a system would identify the potential for conflicts before they escalate, allowing for timely intervention. The need for such mechanism has only grown more urgent in recent times. In addition to enhancing early warning systems, we must also revive and strengthen the AU's Peace and Security Council, originally envisioned as a key institution for conflict resolution on the continent. The Liberation Committee once played a vital role in guiding African nations through their struggles for independence, and a revitalized institution could offer the same leadership in resolving contemporary conflicts By refocusing the Council's mandate and ensuring it has the resources and authority to act decisively, Africa can better manage its security challenges. However, the growing focus on militarized conflict resolution rather than diplomacy will undoubtedly drain resources that should be directed towards social security, education, healthcare, and poverty alleviation. The resources of African nations should be used to uplift people, not to perpetuate wars. A shift towards empowering institutions for peace and conflict resolution is not only necessary, but urgent if we are to build a stable, prosperous future for the continent. The new government of South Africa also extended invitations, if you still recall, to both Israelis and Palestinians in an effort to find a solution to for the conflict. However, all the current global situation, it is clear that the Cold War was not fully resolved or that its legacy still lingers. The ongoing tensions between Western countries and Eastern Bloc, particularly Russia, suggest a trust deficit. As a result, the US often imposes unilateral sanctions on countries, and any nation working with those sanctioned countries is labeled as a friend of the enemy. In discussing trust issues, developing countries like South Africa often find themselves caught in the crossfire. The geopolitical situation in Africa is often influenced by external actors who wish to benefit from the continent's vast natural resources. Many of the conflicts we witness today are driven not just by internal political instability, but by the desire of powerful individuals and foreign interests to control specific products and the resources such as minerals, oil, and other valuable commodities. These resources, which should be used for the benefit of African nations, often become the source of exploitation and manipulation, fueling wars and deepening poverty. At the same time, we are witnessing a disturbing trend where democratic governments are being overthrown by military coups in some parts of Africa. The AU has a significant task ahead, but it needs to fully understand the underlying causes of conflict in each affected region. While we have opted to send peacekeeping forces to certain conflict zones, what often lacks is a political process to complement the military presence. Political ceasefires could ease tensions, and there should be a clear structure to support meetings aimed at achieving political solutions. It is meetings aimed at achieving political solutions. It is disheartening for the continent when Africans fight each other, often over resources that could greatly benefit many poor masses of the continent. For example, the South African National Defence Force has been tasked by UN, AU, and later SADC to enforce peace in countries like DRC and Mozambique. It's a need to establish a strategy that encourages political will among those involved in the conflict before deploying troops. It becomes a significant challenge when troops are deployed and one faction views them as enemies, leading to inevitable casualties. The continent may need to review its peacekeeping missions to prioritize saving lives, which is the ultimate goal. It becomes even more complicated when we hear that rebel conflicts are backed by external forces seeking to exploit Africa's resources. There is a strong need for early warning system so that AU or regional leaders can urgently address emerging conflicts before they escalate. Reflecting on this situation since the Cold War, even the military industry today employs old methods of conflict, where the use of weapons as means of destruction have become a norm, and the incorporation of new technologies driven by profit motives threatens the very existence of peace in Africa. The well-known phrase, Africa solution for African problems, must not merely be rhetoric. It must be our guiding principle in addressing the myriad challenges we face. For far too long, African conflicts have been defined, managed, and even resolved by external actors. While we appreciate the role that international partners play in our peace and security efforts, it is ultimately Africans who understand our culture dynamics, historical experiences, and local realities. It is Africans who lead the way in ensuring the peace takes root and thrives across the continent. The AU's Agenda 2063 outlines a vision of an Africa that is integrated, prosperous, and at peace with itself. This vision is built on the belief that Africa's destiny must be shaped by Africans. The silencing of the guns by 2020 initiative, while ambitious, was a bold declaration of our collective desire to end conflicts in our soil. Although we have not fully achieved this goal, significant progress has been made. Today we must build on those achievements by strengthening our resolve to silence the guns for good through diplomatic, political, and economic efforts. The complexities of Africa's conflicts cannot be overstated. Each conflict is unique, rooted in a mixture of historical, economic, political, and social factors. However, there are common drivers that we must address that we must address if we are to achieve lasting peace. One of the most critical drivers of conflict is poor governance. Weak institutions, corruption, and the absence of rule of law create environments where violence can easily take root. In many cases, marginalized populations who feel excluded from political and economic processes turn to violence as a means of redress. Addressing the structural inequalities that breed discontent is paramount to ensuring peace. Economic underdevelopment is another major factor. When people are denied access to basic needs like food, water, education, and employment, the ground becomes fertile for unrest. Development and peace must go hand in hand. We must work towards an Africa where every citizen has access to opportunities that allow them to live dignified lives. Furthermore, we cannot overlook the role of external interference in our conflicts. Africa has historically been a battleground for global powers seeking to advance their strategic interest. The external manipulation continues today, often exacerbating existing tensions and prolonging the conflicts. We must be vigilant and assert our sovereignty, ensuring that any external involvement in our peace process is aligned with African interests. To effectively address the root causes of conflict, we must invest in building strong institutions. It is only through
All right, we come out of that annual peace and security dialogue, that being hosted by the Thabo Mbeki Foundation, and the Deputy Minister of Defence and Military Veterans on the podium there, talking about resources in Africa which should be used to uplift its people in order to build a prosperous future for the continent, touching on the global situation as well, tensions between the West and the Eastern Bloc, suggesting that there is still a trust deficit. The geopolitical situation, of course, he also touching on that, and how some of those situations, the geopolitical situations, have an influence on the African continent. Outside forces, he says, with interest.